What if I told you there are 27 farm dinners so delicious they once fed entire families through the Great Depression, but have completely vanished from American tables? These weren't just meals. They were survival, comfort, and tradition all rolled into one. What I'm about to show you will take you back to your grandmother's kitchen and make you wonder why we ever stopped making these incredible dishes. 1. Fried rabbit with milk gravy. When times were tough and chicken was a luxury, rabbit became the answer for farm families across America. Caught wild or raised in backyard hutches, rabbits provided protein when other meats were scarce. The magic happened in a well-seasoned cast iron skillet, where rabbit pieces that had soaked overnight in tangy buttermilk were dredged in seasoned flour and fried to golden perfection in precious rendered lard. The real treasure was the gravy that followed, made from those same pan drippings whisked with flour and fresh milk until it was thick enough to coat every corner of the plate. My neighbor's grandmother could make a single rabbit feed 8 hungry children on their Kansas farm, and that satisfying crunch of perfectly fried rabbit is a sound that's all but vanished from American kitchens. 2. Pickled beet eggs. When the fire was low and nobody wanted to scrub another pot, farm families turned to the cool cellar for dinner. Hard-boiled eggs were steeped with pickled beets in a sweet, tangy vinegar bath, and after a day together, the whites turned a magnificent magenta while the yolks mellowed to a creamy consistency. Served with cold biscuits, left over from breakfast, and maybe a spoonful of jam on the side, this was quiet food that never felt boring. The tartness of the beets, the soft salt of the eggs, the crumb of day-old biscuit, it was all done with intention and care. 3. Salt pork and vinegar slaw sandwiches. These weren't fancy sandwiches meant for photographs. They were greasy, sharp, and a little sloppy, just the way a long workday demanded. Salt pork, the preserved fat and meat from the pig's belly, was pan-fried until the edges crisped like bark, offering an intensely savory foundation that could satisfy the hungriest farmhand. The vinegar slaw, a raw mix of cabbage, onion, and white vinegar with just a pinch of sugar, cut through the fat and woke up tired taste buds like nothing else could. Mrs. Johnson down the road would slice her salt pork so thin you could almost see through it, then fry it until it shattered between your teeth. 4. Molasses baked beans with saltine crust. This wasn't a quick weeknight dinner. Molasses baked beans were an all-day affair that perfumed farmhouses with sweet, smoky anticipation. The beans soaked overnight, then slow-baked with onion, mustard, and deep, sticky molasses until they were dark and tender enough to break with a spoon. The top was covered in crushed saltines, browned until crisp and flaking like dry pie crust. Every family had their own version. Some threw in a piece of salt pork or a stray sausage if they had it, but it was the molasses that turned these humble beans into something rich and special. 5. Cabbage potato cakes. Born from boredom and necessity, these cabbage cakes transformed humble ingredients into something genuinely special. Chopped cabbage mixed with mashed potatoes, onion, and a scoop of precious sour cream, then pan-fried until crisp and golden. What emerged was somewhere between a latke and a hush puppy. These little cakes were tender in the middle and whispering with steam, served with applesauce or next to whatever protein was available. Mr. Peterson, who lived next door to my grandparents, swore these cakes cured his winter blues. You could smell them cooking from outside the house, the aroma cutting through the cold air like a promise. 6. Boiled dinner with ham hocks. The boiled dinner was a one-pot wonder that fed hungry mouths on little smoked ham hocks, peeled turnips, carrots, onions, and perhaps a potato, all bubbling together until the bones softened and the broth turned cloudy with fat and salt. This was winter food designed for nights when the wind rattled the windows and you could see your breath indoors. My mother remembers how her grandmother would save the broth, using it to start the next day's soup or to cook tomorrow's grains. It was about making a little meat stretch a long way and letting the vegetables do most of the work. 7. Milk toast with fried apples. When money was tight or someone was sick, milk toast was the answer. Warm, soft, and kind on both the wallet and the stomach. Toasted bread soaked in hot milk, sometimes sweetened, sometimes salted, with fried apples sliced thin and cooked in butter with a bit of cinnamon for contrast and memory. The apples brought texture and sweetness, while a little cracked black pepper gave it just enough edge to wake up your taste buds. "It'll stick to your ribs," my grandfather would say, as he made this for us when we had colds. It was meant to take care of you, and for many who grew up in those lean years, it still tastes like love in its quietest form. 8. Scrapple with garden chow. Scrapple wasn't just breakfast, it was survival transformed into a delicacy. Made from pork scraps and cornmeal, boiled and chilled into a loaf that could be sliced and fried, Scrapple embodied the waste not, want not wisdom of farming life. Every bite was dense, savory, and filled with the flavor of a dozen cuts of meat you could never afford on their own. Paired with garden chow, a spicy, vinegary mix of pickled vegetables canned in summer, it became a bold, bracing start to any day. I remember watching my grandfather carefully slice this Pennsylvania pate from a loaf he'd made after butchering day. Each piece fried until the outside formed a thin, crispy shell while the inside remained creamy. 9. Chicken foot soup with dumplings. Nothing went to waste in the farm kitchen, especially not when it came to chicken. While today we focus on white meat breasts, farm families utilized every part of the bird, including the feet, which released a gelatin that thickened the soup and made it silky in a way that no roux could match. The dumplings were simply flour and fat, dropped by spoonfuls into the bubbling pot, while the broth was built on collard greens, wilted and steeped until they lent their earthy minerality to every spoonful. Miss Ellie, who lived just down the dirt road from us, would make this every Sunday, dropping the dumplings in just after the church bells rang. 10. Cornmeal mush with sorghum. When the cupboard was nearly bare, cornmeal mush stepped in to fill empty stomachs. Just cornmeal, salt, water, and perhaps a pinch of thyme, cooked low and slow until thick, then poured into a loaf pan to set. The next day, it was sliced and pan-fried in whatever fat was available, lard, bacon grease, or butter on special occasions. The sorghum, thick, dark, and sweet, was poured hot from the jar and turned something plain into something profound. "I lived on this during the Dust Bowl years," my great-uncle used to tell me. "Made me strong enough to plow from sunrise to sunset." 11. Creamed spinach with poached egg. This was the kind of dinner you made when teeth were weak, appetites were small, but care was still strong. A gentle meal that nourished body and soul. The spinach was boiled down soft, drained, and folded with cream, butter, and a whisper of nutmeg, then topped with a gently poached egg so the yolk stayed golden and runny. Toast points, sliced triangles of day-old bread crisped in a pan with a little butter, were there to give the whole dish structure and to soak up every last bit of goodness. My aunt remembers her grandmother making this for her after school. It was the first time I realized food could be both simple and special. 12. Cold buttermilk soup with cucumbers. When summer came heavy and hot, when kitchen work near a wood stove became unbearable, cold buttermilk soup offered blessed relief. The buttermilk was sharp and sour, sometimes cut with a little cream, and filled with crisp slices of fresh cucumber straight from the garden. Chopped still added a clean, green bite that lingered on the tongue. My father would come in from haying, drenched in sweat, recalled my neighbor who grew up on a dairy farm. And this was all he wanted, said it cooled him from the inside out. Somewhere between air conditioning and fast food, this little bowl of cold clarity disappeared. 13. Onion pie with bacon drippings crust. Onion pie was never going to win any beauty contests, but it didn't have to. It was golden and sagging, its filling pale and fragrant with long-simmered onions, cream, and perhaps a faint dusting of nutmeg or thyme. The crust, made from flour in the drippings saved from countless breakfasts, flaked with a richness that butter could not match. Mrs. Miller, who lived on the farm next to ours, would gather onions from her garden just as they began to soften in storage, saying they were sweetest then. She'd slice them paper thin and let them almost melt into the custard. 14th, Salsifi gratin. Have you even heard of salsifi? This forgotten root vegetable was once a winter staple in rural kitchens, earning the nickname oyster plant for its faintly oceanic flavor. Once cooked, peeled, and boiled, salsifi softened into something creamy and nutty, then was laid into buttered pans topped with breadcrumbs and sharp cheddar cheese, and baked until golden and bubbling. The old farmer's almanac at my grandparents' house had a dog-eared page with salsifi recipes, proof of how important this now forgotten vegetable once was. You never eat with just your mouth, my grandmother used to say. You eat with your memories too. 15. Ox tongue with mashed parsnips. Some forgotten farm dishes required patience, not modern approval. Ox tongue, large and leathery before cooking, was scrubbed, brined, and smoked slowly until it sliced like the finest deli meat, but tasted deeper, richer, like beef turned inside out. The parsnips, pale cousins to the carrot, were boiled and mashed with butter and a pinch of salt, offering their own subtle sweetness to counter the savory meat. My father carved the tongue so thin you could see through it, remembered an elderly farmer I spoke with, made it seem fancy, even though we knew it was just making ends meet. 16th, wilted lettuce salad with hot bacon dressing. This wasn't just a salad, it was supper, hearty, hot, and nothing like the cold greens we call salad today. A head of fresh lettuce torn by hand was tossed in a bowl with slices of hot-boiled potatoes. Then came the real magic, a skillet of hot bacon grease, vinegar, and sugar poured over everything while still sizzling. The lettuce wilted instantly, turning glossy and tender, while the potatoes soaked up every drop of sweet sour fat. My grandmother would make this on evenings when thunderstorms threatened and field work had to be abandoned early. Quick, but still proper. 17. Chipped beef on grits cakes. During World War II, meat was rationed and frugality ruled every kitchen. Chipped beef, dried salty slivers of preserved beef, was rehydrated in a skillet with cream, butter, and a little black pepper, becoming a thick, rich gravy. Instead of toast, farmers in the South used fried grits cakes, leftover grits chilled in a pan, sliced into squares, and crisped in bacon fat until golden. My friend's father, who served in the Navy, would make this every Thursday for his family long after the war ended. "It reminds me of making it through," he'd say while pouring the creamy sauce over those crispy cakes. 18. Green tomato and onion sandwiches. When the tomatoes refused to ripen before frost threatened, farm cooks turned to innovation rather than disappointment. Green tomatoes, firm, tart, and abundant at season's end, were sliced thick, dredged in cornmeal, and fried until golden, providing a crisp, tangy foundation. The onions, sweet and sharp, were grilled or pan-seared until soft, but the secret weapon was the mustard butter. Softened butter, mixed with spicy mustard and sometimes a pinch of sugar, spread thick on toasted bread. Mr. Williams, whose farm bordered ours, would make these sandwiches the morning after the first frost warning, having harvested all his green tomatoes by lantern light the night before. 19. Sauerkraut and noodle bake. Sunday's roast became Tuesday's casserole in the waste-nothing world of farm cooking. This hearty bake took the last slices of weekend meat, beef, pork, or whatever you had, and chopped them fine, stretching them into another full meal. Mixed in a casserole dish with buttery egg noodles, tangy sauerkraut, a little sour cream, and a pinch of caraway seed, it baked into something warm, filling, and deeply familiar. Wednesday was always sauerkraut and noodles, remembered my friend's mother who grew up in rural Ohio. You could tell what day it was by what was cooking. German and Eastern European immigrants brought these flavors with them, and those tastes settled into the soil of American farmland. 20. Stuffed marrow squash. The late garden's bounty brought oversized marrow squash, those zucchini that escaped picking and grew to the size of small baseball bats. Rather than discard these giants as too tough or seedy, clever farm cooks transformed them into edible vessels for savory stuffing. Hollowed out and roasted until tender, the squash were filled with a savory mix of breadcrumbs, small amounts of precious sausage, onions, and garden sage. Sometimes the stuffing included chopped apples or dried cranberries in autumn. Mrs. Cooper, who ran the farm stand down the road, would save her biggest squash specifically for stuffing, saying the extra room meant extra filling, which was the best part anyway. 21st. Chicken neck and barley soup. This dish turned scraps into treasure, making something from parts that modern shoppers rarely even see. The necks and backs of chickens, too small for most modern recipes, held pockets of rich meat and skin that melted into the pot with time. Roasted low and slow, they gave up every bit of flavor, transforming water into broth and barley into something more than just grain. The leeks were sliced thin and cooked until sweet, their gentle bite curling around every spoonful. My grandmother would start this pot in the morning before heading to the hen house, letting it simmer all day until evening chores were done. "We never called them leftovers," said an 80-year-old woman I met at a county fair. "We called them ingredients for tomorrow." 22nd. Cold ham loaf with apple rings. This was Sunday lunch without the oven, perfect for hot summer days, when lighting the stove meant making the house unbearable. The ham loaf, pink, pressed, and slightly sweet, was prepared the day before, chilled overnight, and sliced thin like a meatloaf that never saw heat. Alongside it came apple rings, spiced with cinnamon and clove, stewed until they were tender and fragrant like pie filling. The gelatin salad sat trembling in its mold, packed with shreds of carrot or bits of celery, sweet and strange, and somehow expected. My aunt recalls how her mother would prepare this meal on Saturday nights after everyone else had gone to bed, ensuring Sunday after church would be cool and comfortable with no cooking required. 23rd. Cornmeal, pone with collards. Cornmeal formed the base of this skillet meal, mixed with mashed potatoes, shredded onion, salt, and a bit of bacon grease, then packed into a cast iron pan and baked until the edges were crispy and the middle was dense and steamy. The top crackled as it cooled, and the scent was somewhere between cornbread and roasted hash. Next to it came the collards, cooked low and slow with a pat of butter, maybe a chunk of ham bone if you had one. The greens were dark and silky, the broth salty and rich, spooned over the pone like gravy. My grandmother would make this whenever the preacher came to dinner, remembered a friend from Georgia. Said it was fancy enough for company, but cheap enough for Wednesday. 24. Gooseberry glazed pork with fried okra. Gooseberries, those tart little green fruits that grew wild along fence rows and barn edges, were once a cook's secret weapon for transforming ordinary cuts of meat into something special. Cooked down with sugar into a tangy glaze, they clung to seared pork like a second skin. The meat, often from a thin chop or a shoulder cut, was browned hard in a cast iron skillet before being finished in the glaze. Beside it came okra, sliced, dredged in cornmeal, and fried until golden. Mr. Thompson, whose family had farmed the same land for generations, would go hunting for wild gooseberries with his grandchildren each summer, turning the expedition into both a game and a grocery run. 25th, rabbit liver with sorghum cornbread. On the farm, nothing went to waste, especially not the liver, which was tender, iron-rich, and deeply flavored. Rabbit liver was particularly prized for its delicate taste compared to stronger flavored beef or chicken livers. It was soaked in milk to soften its bite, then seared with onions until it browned at the edges and melted in the middle. Next to it came the sorghum cornbread, a slightly sweet, dense bread made with stone-ground cornmeal and thick black syrup, baked until the crust browned and cracked. My neighbor's grandmother insisted this meal be eaten in silence to properly respect what the animal gave them. Kids often turned up their noses at liver, but as you grew older, so did your taste for it. 26. Tomato gravy with ham scraps. Breakfast that felt like supper. That's what tomato gravy delivered on cold mornings when farm work demanded serious fuel. The gravy started with bacon grease or lard, flour browned in the fat, then stirred with chopped tomatoes, fresh or canned, until it thickened into something smooth, tangy, and red. A pinch of sugar brought balance. A dash of pepper gave heat. Poured hot over a wedge of skillet-baked cornbread, it soaked in fast, turning crumb into gold. The ham came next. Fried bits or scraps from the bone scattered on top like a garnish. My daddy wouldn't touch oatmeal, an elderly woman from eastern Tennessee told me. Said tomato gravy and cornbread was the only proper way to start a day working tobacco. 27th, turnip green stew with cornmeal dumplings. A bowl that smelled like winter survival, turnip green stew was a staple when fresh produce was scarce, but root cellars were still stocked with last fall's harvest. The greens were chopped rough and simmered with fatback, thick salty cuts of pork belly that melted slowly into the broth. The stew was thin but rich, flavored with onion, garlic, and vinegar, then dotted with dumplings made from cornmeal and a touch of lard. The dumplings steamed as they cooked, puffing up into soft yellow clouds that floated above the greens. My great-grandmother could feed 12 people with 2 turnips and a piece of fatback, remarked a friend whose family had farmed in Georgia for generations, and nobody left the table hungry. You didn't need meat to make this stew satisfying. The fatback did the talking, providing richness and depth that transformed simple ingredients into something filling and nourishing through the coldest months. These 27 forgotten farm dinners proved that our ancestors knew how to turn necessity into deliciousness, creating meals that fed both body and soul through the toughest times. From fried rabbit with milk gravy to turnip green stew, these dishes tell the story of American resilience and ingenuity in the kitchen. If you enjoyed this journey through America's forgotten farm table, make sure to subscribe for more delicious dives into food history, and don't miss the next video on your screen where we explore even more lost recipes that deserve a comeback on modern tables.